Hello, hello, hello. Good morning or afternoon to everyone. Welcome back to another talk. We've got Ray Camden here. Ray, if you could start your video and audio and come on up on stage with me.
Do I have to?
Yes. Just this once. So.
Just this once. Good morning.
Ray.
Hey.
You looking good? You ready to tell us? I'm so excited. I am personally incredibly excited about this talk, Ray. Alpine, like I've read your blogs. I know you're excited about Alpine, and that means that I'm like, okay, I want to know what's going on with this thing. So I'm going to punch you over to your talk and then sit here and watch gleefully for the next hour.
Sounds great. And let me find my screen share. Blobbity, blobbity, blobbity. All right. And are y'all seeing my lovely screens?
We can see it. Introduction to Alpine.js. Excellent.
Yes. And I did. I spent all 30 seconds looking for mountain pictures to put in this slide. So that is the most design work that you will see out of me. I am the only person at Adobe who can't design anything at all. I have no problem admitting that. So good morning, everybody. I am Raymond Camden. I am a developer evangelist for Adobe, actually, working on document services stuff. So nothing that I'm talking about today at all. But if you ever have a need to do automation involving your documents, so taking a PDF and OCRing it, extracting information from it, converting stuff to PDF, things from PDF, et cetera. We have wonderful SDKs and APIs, et cetera. And that is the team I work on. And again, I'm, I guess, a bad evangelist because I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about JavaScript stuff. If you have any questions about what I'm talking about today, please reach out to me. I've got two ways you can do that. I have a blog, raymondcamden.com, and there's multiple ways for you to contact me on there. Also, I am on Twitter for all that's worth, and my DMs are open. So if you have a question, reach out. I absolutely don't mind. My last blog post, or two blog posts ago, was actually driven by a great question that came in via a DM. So again, definitely feel free to reach out. You will not be bothering me. I love to answer questions because it means I get to write more code. I want to give a big shout out to Luis Mahano. Back in April of this year, I was at a conference and they had multiple slots going on and none of them looked terribly interesting, but I knew Luis, I knew him, I knew he was a good presenter. So I attended his session, did not care what he was talking about. Like, I'm just being honest. I'd never heard of Alpine, but I knew him. I attended a session and I start, hearing about Alpine. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'm like, oh, that's really, really cool. And I just got like more and more and more excited about it. So I thank him, and I also blame him for all the blog posts and all these presentations that I'll be doing. It's all his fault. And thank you, Luis. So Alpine.js, TLDR, like the high level view of what it is. It is a simple JS framework. Remember, simple? I don't mind the fact that we have so many tools now. We have so much power now. But I do kind of miss the early days when you were allowed to put a web page with no JavaScript. Imagine that. And certainly there's still reason.
Oh no! Where did Ray go? Ray just dropped off the face of the earth. Sorry, folks. Ray, sorry. Could you reshare your stuff? My bad. I think you got. There he is. Sorry, folks.
All right.
Sorry about that. Yeah, you were accidentally pushed out of the presenter slot.
Oh.
My bad. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. We love you. We want you here, Ray. So keep going.
Well, I'm going to storm off the stage right now. So simple, good. There we go. I'll just say that. All right, and just to give more context into how simple it is, and give me 1 second, get my notes back. It only has 15 attributes, 6 properties, and 2 methods. It's a whopping 36 kilobytes minified, 13 kilobytes if you minimize and gzip it. It is small, and it does only a couple of things, which is all right. It helps you dynamically render data in your HTML. So, one of the simplest things I'll do with JavaScript is I'll call a remote API, and then I need to render that. So Alpine makes that a bit easier. It will bind data and form fields together. So I have a form, and when you type something in there, I need to do something with it. Alpine will make that easy. It will also make it easier to handle events. Now, Alpine does more than this, but these are kind of like the 3 core features, excuse me, that it focuses on. And honestly, like when I think about the last 20 years of building web apps, those 3 points covers like 95% of what I have needed to do. So a framework that only does that is just great. Some more TLDR, it is at Alpine.js.dev if you want to look at the homepage, and I'll pop that open just so you can see what that looks like. It came out way back in 2019, so it's definitely kind of new, but it's not brand new. Currently at version 3.102. If I did not have that on the slide, I would have no idea what it is. I just know it's version 3. But it is being actively maintained, mostly by one person, a Caleb Porzio. And I know the one time I've had to reach out to him to ask him about Alpine, he was very helpful. And actually, I asked him about when the initial release was because I couldn't figure that out because I'm lame. All right, so it is Vue-like, and I put that in quotes. Because on one hand, that's a good thing because like a lot of my muscle memory and a lot of the ways I think about approaching building an application, I've done a lot with Vue, and so a lot of that applies to Alpine as well. I put the red flag there because sometimes it doesn't, so that muscle memory both helps me and also trips me up as well. In fact, 10 minutes before this presentation, I was adding a slide in the demo because that's just what you do. And I did a quick demo and it wasn't working. And it wasn't working because I typed something that was Vue specific and not Alpine specific. It is great for progressive enhancement. And that is a simple way of saying, I have a web page, I need some interactivity. Like that's it. So I have a search page. And when you click the search button, I want to search against an API. That is taking something and adding a bit of interactivity to a simple web page. It's not really great for apps. And I put that in quotes, and I have to share the salt because what is an application and what is a interactive page is absolutely kind of gray. There's a wide variety between Gmail, which was like known as one of the first really interactive apps built on the web, and adding a bit of interactivity. There's a whole range of kind of stuff in there. I tend to think of an application or a web application whenever you start having routes. So you have a login page, you have a page to manage users, you have a page to manage X, Y, and Z. You have one web app with different things going on, different routes, different views, different UI. At that point, I consider that an application. And typically, if you have one main view, I don't consider that an app. I think Alpine is great for that. But you can have one main view that gets quite complex. So if you have a large product inventory and you need to help your salespeople kind of find stuff, you can imagine a pretty complex form. So, search by product name, by product category, by product price, by product availability, by product stock. You could have 20 different form fields on top some that show up when other form fields show up. You can get a pretty complex search query on top. I'd build it in Alpine, but that's not necessarily simple per se. So, when I look at building something new, if I think that it's going to have multiple views and multiple routes, I probably will not pick Alpine, but that's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. What I like about this a lot, I did a lot with Vue, and in Vue 3.0, I feel like Vue is not as appropriate for progressive enhancement or the one page, make it fancier. That's absolutely a personal opinion, but I feel like Vue is really more focused now towards applications and not both, which makes me a bit sad. And I could talk about that a bit later, but that's me on my soapbox that y'all don't want to go into. So let's actually talk about how we can start building stuff. So step one, you make a script tag and you copy and paste it. And this is a CDN. You can download it. There's also an npm install, but I like just having a script tag. That's nice and simple. Next thing you'll do is figure out your area of concern. And I put that in quotes because it's not a great way of describing it. But when I was learning Vue, it was kind of a mental roadblock for me because I came into Vue via like the jQuery path, where when you have the jQuery library, you get to start doing whatever in the heck you want. I want to change some HTML. I want to add some text. I want to read a form field. I want to do whatever. jQuery is a tool set that lets you manipulate your entire page. What Vue and Alpine does differently is that they want you to specify, hey, where am I going to be working in the DOM? Like, what do I have to look out for? What am I going to be interactive? So you will need to figure out, looking at your web page, excuse me, what are the areas that I need to be concerned about? Now, that's very, very difficult, incredibly difficult. You take an HTML template, and I've removed all the junk around it, and you take that and you find the area. In this case, it's a div. And in that div, I've added an attribute, x-data equals blank. We're going to fill that in a few minutes. But what I've done, I say, hey, Alpine, this block here, and this is only lines 6 to 8. That is the area that I am going to be concerned about. All right, so once you've done that, now you can start actually doing some coding. So first thing we'll work with is xdata. This is where you will define variables, lets you implement event handlers, lets you do things like, hey, when you start up, run me, and lets you define ad hoc methods. Xdata is where really you can do every single part of the application / interactivity that you're building. So what does that look like? Within my xdata, I define an object, and I could start adding just random values. So I have a name and I have an age, and I could have whatever makes sense for the interactivity that I'm doing. So that's how you begin. How do you actually start looking at and like working with data? So Alpine has two ways of doing it. The first is xtext, and the second is xhtml. And as you could probably guess, if you're working with textual content, you will use xtext. If you have anything that involves HTML, you will use HTML. And this is kind of a security feature. So if you're working with remote data, for example, and you don't want anything in there to muck with your DOM or potentially break things or have a random table or a pop-up or whatever, then you'll just always use xtext and you will be safe. If you know that you will have some HTML and you feel that it's safe and you want that to actually render, then you'll use xhtml. And these are attributes that you'll add into your DOM. And here is an example of that. So again, I have that top level div. I have that top level xdata. I've defined a name and an age. And then I just started, doing some HTML. Now, I will say, looking at this, it's a bit more verbose than Vue, whereas in Vue, you just have a bracket. In this, I have to define DOM elements that will actually get the text or get the HTML, but I am totally fine with that. You can see here, I have my name is, and then the span bound to the name value, and then my age. And if we run this, in my lovely code pin, you can see, congratulations, it works. I am Raymond B. Camden. If I modify here and give it a second, code pin will reload. And in a couple months, I will be 50, and I'm not concerned about that at all. It's going to be fine. Now, I mentioned how XX won't do HTML. If I wanted to make my last name bold, I'll just add some values in there. CodePen loves the format in my crap. I keep forgetting to turn that off because I have a Ray's style. But I will forgive CodePen for that. But you can see the HTML is escaped out. But if I change that X text to XHTML, then we are good to go. You see it rendered all right. All right, again, starting simple, all right? Next thing we want to do is a conditional. Like Vue.js, Alpine will have two of them. We'll have xShow, which will hide and unhide from the DOM. So those elements are still in the DOM. They're just hidden with CSS. Or xif, which will actually manipulate the DOM. Xif is a little bit different, where you must use the template tag, and you must have one root element. That's easy to break. I typically prefer xif just because I like the name better. But because xShow is a bit more flexible, I will probably use xShow more often. I've basically been using Alpine since I saw Luis's presentation a couple months ago. So I consider myself real new to it. So a year from now, the way I use Alpine may change. All right. So again, starting with an X data, I have a name and an age. And I have an example of xShow where I'm doing a condition if name equals Raymond. I'll say hi. And I put that on a div. Xif has to be on a template, and you must have one root DOM element. In this case, I have a paragraph tag, and I'm checking if age is greater than 40. So if we see this, if we render this, it kind of works as expected. If I change my name to Raymundo, like so, that xShow will go away. And if I change my age, if only it was that easy, we'll see that that part goes away again. If I had DevTools open, I could see that the DOM has actually removed that paragraph tag, whereas the div for hi Ray is still in there. It's just hidden. All right. Attribute binding, either via x-bind, and you use x-bind the DOM attribute that you care about, pointing to the value that you want to use. Like Vue.js, because this is used so often, there's a shortcut. So colon something equals some value. This will make a bit more sense when you see an example. In this case, in my X data, I have set a variable called cat image. It's a URL. And I have taken an image tag and I have bound it to that particular value. Now, I'm using a source attribute here. Any DOM attribute would work. So, for example, using the disabled property on a button until a person has typed something. You could do that with binding as well. So my example, and it works as expected, the image is bound to that particular value. If I were to change those values, this is a placeholder service for cats, the best thing on the internet. But again, I changed that value, the binding updated automatically, and we can make this a bit more dynamic if we wanted to. To handle looping, there is an X4. You can also get the index when you're looping. So if you want to do like a number for each thing you're looping over, this requires you to use template with, again, one root element. That tripped me up 2 days ago. I was working on a demo and I had, I think, 2 paragraph tags inside my template. Must have only one root item. You can use a key value, which will help Alpine perform better if you're doing things like reordering. And this is, again, very similar to how Vue.js works. If you've seen their examples, if you loop, they typically ask that you add a key. It's not required. Just something to keep in mind that, if you are going to be manipulating that data being rendered, it'll work a bit better if you include the key. That was long-winded. Hopefully this example makes it a bit simpler to see. I have my data. It is an array of cats, in this case, just strings. I'm using X4 on the template tag, looping over each one. And inside, I'm just outputting the particular value. So if we look at that, we could see my array. We could see the loop. What happens if you forget that Alpine rule? I'll break this on purpose. And we'll see it totally just ignored that second paragraph. If I wanted to have multiple paragraph tags, I would just wrap this with a div. And please forgive CodePen for being wonky about its formatting. But we could see this time it worked correctly. And if my data changes, rando cat, like so, we will get one more item. And I'll get rid of this paragraph. And so because of that rule about one core item on top, I will typically use a div tag because I kind of assume I'm going to do more than just a simple paragraph. I'll have multiple things in there, and having that div is just kind of a lazy way to ensure that I can just add stuff without having to worry about what's in there. As a slightly more advanced example, my data could actually be an array of objects. In this case, I have ID values and I have image values. I loop over it the same way, except this time I did add a key value because I have a unique identifier for each of my items. And inside of there, I have my paragraph tag. I have an image pointed to the particular object instances .img value, and then the name. And we could see as we loop over here, we see values. And just to make sure that it is actually working, I will copy and paste and add one more cat because there's nothing wrong with more cats in the world. And this will be cat 4. And let's make it a huge cat. See what happens if I break my browser here. Oh yeah, I did something. My scroll bars are huge. And that cat is somewhere in there. There is an adorable cat picture or something horrible. It could be either or, because it looks kind of scary that big. But again, the data changed, the DOM automatically changed, which is nice. So if I was loading data via an API, perhaps I was pinging that API at a particular interval, as soon as my information changes, then the DOM will update automatically for me as well. So let's talk about form binding, because this will be something that you use probably a lot. There's another X attribute, this time called X model, works on all form fields. And I put an asterisk there. I didn't see this in the docs, but I know from Vue that X model doesn't work with input type equals file. And there are security reasons for that, because you don't want, or you can't actually set the value of a file field, because if you could, then someone could write code that would point it to sensitive files on your system, and you do things like automatically upload it. But outside of that, it should work just fine on your inputs, your selects, your text areas, etc. And this is two-way binding. So if a person changes a value in the form field, Alpine's data version of that will change as well. And if that particular data changes for whatever reason, then your form field is going to change as well. It also supports different modifiers. I just have one example of here, up here for .number. In case you're not aware, numbers in form fields will be strings. They won't actually be numbers. That's been the case in JavaScript since day one. And I continue to screw up that pretty much every single time. It's 50-50 chance on whether or not I will remember to run a parsent on those values first. Typically, I tend to forget. So as an example of what this looks like, I have X data. In this case, I only have a string value for name. And I'm going to bind that to a input field using X model. Now, again, I mentioned that this works on other things. So if I had a select field, that would work as well. If I had a text area, that would work. You can do radio buttons. You could do checkbox buttons. It all just kind of plain works. And I'm just quickly glancing to see if I see any good questions, and I do not yet, so great. All right, so here is my live example. I have a couple values. I have a name, I have is cool, I have an age value, and I'm also outputting some stuff on top, just so I could see both a textual version and a form field version. Here is my input field that I'm binding to name using X model. Here is a select one, and here is an input for age. So if I go ahead and change it in data, I'll make myself be Raymond. I can see that it automatically updates the form field. And if I do it here, the Mullah, Raymond the Mullah, I see it automatically updated the bound span as well. No big surprise there. If I change cool to false, and by the way, this weird thing over here, that's not Alpine. That is CodePen being embedded. For some reason, breaks drop downs. It doesn't break it, but makes it render a bit weird. But when I set that value to false, you could see that the if on top right there breaks. It doesn't break. It goes away as expected. And if I make this true again, it should say that I'm cool. So I have a value for my age. And you can see next year I will be age plus 1 years old. And it's working out of the box so far. But as soon as I change that, you can see that it breaks. Next year I'll be 501 years old. Again, that is expected. And if I go here and do number, basically add a modifier, and I'll make this, I can't resize in the embed, that's all right. If I change this now to 50, you can see it shows up properly as the right value. So don't forget that. I will say, I'm a bit curious, and I'm actually going faster than I anticipated, so we could try things live. One thing I'm curious about is if I get rid of this, get rid of that modifier, and we'll let CodePen reload, and we'll confirm it's broken again. All right, if I do input type equals number, and I always forget if it's number or numeric, but we'll see what happens. Okay, it's definitely working in terms of form fields. Yeah, so even when the form field is the right value for a number, JavaScript will still see that as a string. But again, the fix, as simple as typing in number. And now when it reloads, I can use the nice number stepper, and it works just fine. So again, in this example, I only have a select. I only have an input type field, an input field. But you can do radio, you can do checkboxes, and you can do text areas. And for the heck of it, we'll drop a text area, X model equals name, and here, text area, text, and close that, text area. I could type live, I really can. And we could see Raymond the Great. It works there as well. And Grammarly, I love you, but go away. All right. So that is form field binding. All right. The other kind of cool feature are getters. This will take a function, and if that function makes use of any of this scoped variable, it will point to the data that Alpine has defined, and Alpine will notice when those values will change and rerun that code for you automatically. You do not need the get modifier. You can leave that off or put it in there. This may not make sense, but hopefully you'll see the code in a second, and it will. If you have used virtual methods or virtual properties in Vue.js, then this will look a bit familiar. So I have two values. I have a first name and a last name, and then I have a getter function for full name. And all this does is make use of those particular variables, in this case, first name and last name, puts a space between them. When Alpine parses my code, it will say, oh, hey, Ray's using this dot first name and this dot last name. So I will notice when those values change. And as soon as they change, I will rerun full name, and anything that's using it will have its value updated. So if we look at a live example of that, if I change to my wife's name, you see it updates automatically, right? Now, I mentioned that this get modifier, which is valid JavaScript nowadays. If I remove this, Alpine is fine with that. We will make sure it works. Like it reload. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I'm still new to Alpine, and I'm still thinking like this is how I'm going to write Alpine. I will probably try to always use the get keyword, just because it's a really good kind of like visual indicator of what's happening there. It makes it stand out a bit more. But it's up to your personal preferences in terms of what makes sense for you. But do it my way, and then you win the prize. How about that? All right. So events, kind of the next big part of the three main features I talked about. One more attribute, x-on, as an example of what that looks like. Button, x on, and then the event type, click equals some function. Just like Vue.js, because this is used so often, there's a shorthand at event name equals thing to run. And there are also modifiers for doing things like if you're listening for keyboard events, you can actually only care about particular keys, which is pretty cool. You can also do things like prevent default on form submit buttons, stuff like that. The way that this looks, you just add it to the end, just like on X model. So dot the modifier, and then you continue typing. So how this looks, and the double semicolons are there because I am an enterprise developer, and so more semicolons means I'm more enterprise. That's totally a typo. I have a button. I have the @click. And I'm telling it to run uppercase, and it will take my data and just essentially uppercase it. It's kind of stupid simple. By the way, if I wanted that to be a getter and make it automatic, so as you type, it just uppercase stuff, I could do that. But I wanted to do it in an event. And how this looks, here's my input field. I will uppercase it like so. And because this is bothering me, of course, I can't save it here, so I'll have to fix that later. But that is an example. And again, that's the modifier there. I don't actually have a full form, so it probably would not submit. But I like to be verbose in cases like this because I really don't have to do anything more than just run my particular code. Hopefully that made some sort of sense. So hopefully you're liking what you see so far. I remember, I was in Luis's his presentation, and I was like, yeah, I like this. This is really, really neat. But there was one thing that was in my head. And I was like, JavaScript and HTML, like, no. I mean, if I had an incredibly simple type thing, then yeah, I can do it in HTML. Although if it's so simple where I don't mind it in HTML, I'll probably skip Alpine and just do vanilla JavaScript instead. So this, like that bugged me. I kept thinking there has to be a way to not do that, to not have that logic in a div, because at some point that div is just going to be some giant string. The other issue is that, I wrapped the value in quotes, and if I want to use quotes inside of there, I'd have to escape it. So I liked it, and it annoyed me at the same time, if that makes sense. I'm a very complex person. I just got to throw that out there. So the good news is that absolutely, yeah, you don't have to do that. You can do things like listen for an init event. You can specify in JavaScript, what your application logic is going to be. You can do things in a proper JavaScript file. Thank God. So the way that looks, you still use Xdata. And so remember, this is telling Alpine, this is the area that I care about. This is the part of the DOM that I have to like look for things like X model and at click, right? But all I've done is given it a name. I've not done anything else in there. So the way that this looks in code, I have my X data, and I'm also showing a couple other new features here. But my code now is over here in JavaScript. So you listen for Alpine itself to initialize. And then once that has fired, I use Alpine.data. I use the same name as my application. And then I do almost the same thing. So I create random variables. I create event handlers. I create getters. I do whatever. And by the way, yes, if I wanted 2 Alpine applications on one page, you could do that. Typically, I probably wouldn't. I'd probably have one. But you can do that if you want. This will work the exact same. So if I do Ray and I hit click uppercase, I do want to point out, again, another thing that it takes from Vue.js. This xcloak says apply CSS that hides everything until the application is initialized. And in CSS, basically, it's display none important. Alpine, when it's loaded and ready to go, it's going to automatically remove that xcloak from the DOM to make things visible. And this loaded so quick, you didn't actually see that. But if you had something more complex going on, then you would. So that's also a great time to talk about the lifecycle of doing things as Alpine loads. So you have an init function, which will be either an init function in JavaScript, or if you want to do it in the DOM, your div that has X data could also have an X init as well. You also have a watch or X effect item, which basically is a way of saying, look for values to change from old to new. You have different ways of doing things. I typically would prefer watch. I'm not going to go deep into that, but I just mentioned it in case you come across it in the docs a little bit later. You have Alpine init. This is where you define something to do when Alpine itself is beginning to initialize the actual framework. Alpine initialize will fire when everything is actually done. So you've already seen Alpine init. Let's take a look at this kind of rolled up together. So on this particular code block, Alpine init is basically the framework as a whole. It is starting up. Alpine data says, hey, I am defining an application called my app, and my particular application then has an init function that will do something so that I can start setting up data, whatever my particular application needs to handle when it starts up, I would do in init. So as a real example of this, and it's a little bit tight here on my lower resolution, but if I go to JavaScript, again, I have my Alpine init. I have my Alpine.data for my application. And then I have an init function where I am using a random API that returns what happened on a particular date, returns events, births, and deaths. So I use the fetch API to grab that. I get the data. And then I do a couple of things from that particular API. I get the date that it's working with, just so that I know what today is. Cannot tell you how many times I have to open my phone or ask my virtual home assistant what day it is. But I put that in the DOM, and then I get the 3 sets of data, events, births, and deaths. You'll see outside of my init, I have all those values with essentially null values or empty values. And, obviously, because it's July 20th, we know that Denmark left the League of Nations. We all knew this, right? In the HTML, it doesn't look too much different. Again, my X data now is just a name, so it's a bit simpler. I like this a lot better because I feel like it's a bit cleaner. And inside of here, it's the same code that you've been seeing. So I have an X text to show the date. I have an X4 that is looping over each of my events, and then each of my births, and then each of my deaths, for each one showing the text, the year. And I thought I had something else in here as well. I will say the API actually returns a lot of cool information. This is a free API. You'll notice there's no API key in there at all, which is pretty darn neat. So some resources before we start to wrap up and start looking at questions. So the main site, again, is alpine.js.dev. There is a Discord. I am not pro Discord. I am not pro Slack because there's a billion Slacks out there. I recognize that it's handy to have a chat. I get that every other person in the world likes it. I'm the old man yelling at the sky. I'm up to here with how many Slacks and Discords I have. So I've not actually joined this particular Discord yet. I'm sure it's great, but there it is. You can join it. I probably won't. And there is an official Alpine.js Twitter. Let's see if they've tweeted today. And we can say, yes, they have. There you go. And again, that's Caleb, the creator. So I recommend following that. For this particular presentation, all of those code pins that I saw that I shared are all in a code pin collection. And you could take these and you could fork them. And oh, by the way, the one that I didn't actually show today because I added it like 5 minutes before we started was kind of dumb, where I took input type equals ranges. If you haven't seen this before, it creates a range grabbable type UI, and I bound it to that cat placeholder service, so I could do crazy stuff like this and just see cat pictures all day. Once this presentation's done, I'm just going to sit here all day and say, "Oh," and say, "Oh, that's cute. I love it." It does load a little bit slow at times, but you know, that's the internet. Oh, it's worth waiting for. That's amazing. But yeah, so that's in there as well. I will say this entire slide deck is up on GitHub. Don't think I have a link for that, but just ask me and I'll share it with you. Things I did not cover. It's funny because I don't really do this in Vue as well, but Alpine does have these nice transitions. My opinion on a transition is that if you add a transition, so I click a button and something shows up and everyone goes, "Ooh, I love it." Here is my rule in transitions. If you're going to add a transition, your job is to sit in your seat and run it 1,000 times. You must run it 1,000 times. If you still like it after 1,000 times, then keep it. If you are annoyed the heck out of what you built, take the dang thing out. Okay? Please use transitions with caution. There are plugins as well covered on the main site. You can also extend Alpine.js. This is all covered in the documentation. And it's something that you could, like read within like an hour probably to cover every single part of it out there. Something I did not include, but I'll point out, they do have a commercial service for their UI components. This is not free. I haven't played with it yet, but things like carousels, accordions, etc. I will say, like, there's nothing stopping you from using Bootstrap with Alpine. In fact, I need to do a blog post on that. So, like, Bootstrap has its own accordion UI component, so you could definitely mash that up with Alpine as well. I'm not saying to not commercially support the creator of Alpine, but I'll just throw that out there as an option as well. And so with that, I will see if there are any questions. And by the way, my chat's over here. That's why I'm looking over there. So you get my dramatic profile shot. And I do see Q&A at the bottom. I was looking at the chat. So Leslie, I think your question was answered. Yes, you can definitely do those variables later. And Leslie, it makes me happy that you had the same question I did when I was sitting in that presentation. Andrew's asking, does Alpine have its own way of doing AJAX requests? It does not. You can use libraries out there. drawing a blank on the one that Vue uses a lot to, or like Vue docs use a lot to. It's a something. You can use other libraries. Don't forget that the browser has fetch built in, and fetch is really, really simple. If you've never seen the docs for fetch in your browser, MDN fetch, go to the Moz Dev Network fetch APIs and take a look at it. So it does not have it. Nolan, how many X data blocks can we have in a page app? I have several. Which one? So Nolan's asking, if I have 2x data with variables in there, like which one is going to win? They should be scoped to each one. So if each one had a name variable, it'd be scoped to that particular block in your DOM. So it should not be an issue of which one wins. Each application should work in isolation. Should. I haven't tested that yet, but I'm totally right. And then Carl asked the same question. Can you have multiple X data diffs? So Carl, that's where if you do X data equals foo, that's how you identify this is the foo app versus this is the goo app. Powell asked about Xcloak. I answered that. And Joshua, I will put it in the, let me put this in the chat real quick. So you'll have a copy of that in Ray Camden chat right there. Oh, WJ, thank you. The name I was thinking was Axios. You can use Axios with Alpine as well. And Axios does have some nice features, doing things like defining a core URL and making it easier to query parameters. I'm not anti-Axios. I just really like Fetch. It's real simpler. And to be clear, WJ, Vue doesn't use Axios. A lot of people who like Vue like Axios. So you'll see a lot of demos with that. Vue doesn't ship with any library like that baked in. And JR, do I have a cat? I have 3 cats, yes. So yeah, both my wife and I are huge, huge cat fans. And that is it for the questions. Thank y'all. I have to pick a winner now, right, Mark?
Yes, you do. We have to pick a winner for the voucher. So tough decision ahead of you, my friend.
Not tough. I mean, I had some good technical questions, but J.R. Krogman asked about cats. So
JR, all right.
JR, you're a winner.
JR, all right. Well, we've got JR's email already. Very, very cool. We actually have quite a bit more time. If people have more questions, cat related or otherwise, we've got a solid 12 minutes. So bring them here. I want to hear more about cats. I want to hear about cat related JavaScript. Actually, here's a question from me, Ray. Why is there not a feline.js written by Ray Camden? Because that just seems like an obvious fit.
I am not writing more frameworks. There are enough frameworks out there. I'm just not doing it.
Probably.
But there's the place image one. There is a cat lorem ipsum. There's a cat fax API. There are multiple options for working with cats and APIs out there already. You don't need any more.
All right. We'll cover that. So you do have a question, Ray. Is one of your cats actually named Pig?
Yes, Pig, Elise, Luna are our 3 cats. We had one named Cracker that we rehomed because he was kind of acting up, and we had some friends who needed a cat, and he's very, very happy there now. And we had a cat named Sammy who passed away. He lived a very, very long life. He was my partner up here in the office. He hung out here, but he passed away recently. So if you look on the back of our car, if you're like stalking me or whatever, we do this stick figure thing. And it's kind of scary because we have, when my wife and I got married together, we have 8 kids. We had 5 cats and a dog. So there's like a line of stick figures that just probably scares everybody following us.
You would have to buy a vehicle with a fairly like wide rear window to make all of those fit, I think.
So I mentioned 8 kids, right? So we have a Suburban to fit those because you need that to fit that many kids.
That's a good point. All right, let's see. I think I saw a question. Oh, what do you think of the new Obi-Wan series? Definitely JS related there.
I loved it. I thought it was great. One of the things that I appreciated about it is that it made me appreciate the prequels more. I was never been a prequel hater at all. I liked it, but it made me appreciate them even more. I loved it. Every morning, every Wednesday morning, I was up at 5 a.m. watching the episode, and then my wife, who does not wake up at 5 a.m., her and I would watch it a second time later, and I enjoyed it even more because I knew all the cool moments coming up.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun. I have not seen that one yet. I just have not had time to, because I cannot just watch it episode by episode. I have to watch them all. I was up till 5 a.m. watching Loki at the point at which I actually watched it. So, by the way, my cat's name is Beauregard. I thought you might appreciate
Lovely
that.
name. Hey, am I still screen sharing?
You are screen sharing. Yeah, we're seeing Introduction to Alpine.js. Oh, that is amazing. Oh, and it's even.
Where did it go? Okay, thank you, Google.
Google decided to change it. Oh my gosh, that is literally epic, right there. Wow,
Ridiculous as well. Also the dust, but I call this car the tanker. It's not really meant to be pretty.
it's all right. It does the job, right? Gets you,
Yeah,
gets you in the team where you need to go. You need a wider car, Greg. I don't think there's a wider car.
No,
I think this is the widest, unless you get a Humvee, and then
there are vans that you can get. We know someone who's an adoptive parent, and they have 10 kids, and they're in the vans. We call it the adoption van because it's something that adoptive families do when they're large. They get the van.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense because I mean, there's only so many row. I think 3 row is the max for most cars, right? But vans, sky's the limit.
Yeah.
I mean, you could even get a bus. Why not? Driving the old bus around. Double-decker car. Yes, definitely. If anyone was going to have a double-decker car, it would be Raymond Camden.
Now, I will say that can someone say where the double-decker car was actually shown? There was one TV show where they had that. And if there's a nerd in here who remembers the show from maybe 10 years or so ago.
What?
No one? I'm watching the chat.
Yeah, Greg is the one who mentioned it, and Greg doesn't seem to know. Yeah. I don't know.
You will all be like, no, not Top. It may have been made in Top Gear. So, anybody remember Fringe?
Yeah, I remember Fringe.
In the other universe, one of the things that was different is that they had double-decker cars.
Oh.
That's right. Jim remembers now, yeah. It was first shown, I'm really nerding out here, randomly, it was a toy car in a kid's room in the background. And people like me were like, oh my God, that's a double-decker car. They do that there. Awesome.
Oh, that's so cool. I totally, yeah, I it's been a bit, my memory's not so good these days. Well, this is awesome. Yeah, I think if there's not any more questions, we'll swap you out to the outro. I just did want to mention that I think, unless plans have changed, you will be at Summit this year in Vegas. So if people wanted to come and stalk you in person, you won't have your truck for them to follow, but I mean, they could follow you around in person. Is that still the case, you think?
Absolutely.
Can't wait. So there you go. Yeah, no cats. Unfortunately, the cats will not be with Ray except in spirit and probably on your shirt, right?
On my luggage, for sure. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to swap us over to the outro. You've got a link here. I actually linked your code pen that you linked earlier in chat if people just want to click that and copy that over so that they can have it there. I want to thank you so much, Ray, for coming and joining us and sharing your stuff. Alpine is awesome. I'm so excited about like getting in there and forcing myself to learn it more and use it more, because it really is just like a really perfect fit with CF, I think. But thanks again. And please, everyone, hit up the poll. Let Ray know how he did. We'll be sharing all of these polls with all the individual speakers. It helps them craft their hone their craft and craft their hone, I guess. And coming up next in just about an hour, just over an hour, we've got improving legacy code while retaining your sanity from David Byers. So David Byers will be here talking about that in just a little bit. Thanks again, Ray. I'm gonna close down the audio for this and keep this up for just a little bit, and then we'll be back in the lobby in just a few minutes.